Hello, I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Chief Networking Officer at PIMS, and welcome to our second season of Minutes with Mike. Now in my 33rd year at PIMS, I've had the privilege of partnering with companies both large and small, supporting their PR and marketing through customized fulfillment and distribution that delivers measurable impact on their brand perception, boosts positive affinity, and fuels their overall brand performance. And throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside many talented folks. This is their story. On this show, we'll sit down with some of the world's top marketing and business thought leaders to learn more about their success, how they got there, how marketing helped them achieve their goals, what strategies they used, and what inspires them. Please join me on this journey as we learn from those who are changing the way we think about business. So sit back, enjoy. You're listening to Minutes with Mike.
Minutes with Mike, take one.
Today is a day of firsts. It's the first time we've had a Minutes with Mike episode, not in our studio at our office. It's the first time that we've done a live face-to-face interview with a guest here at the Moxie Times Square in New York City. And it's the first time we were able to interview our friend Conor Begley.
We'll take it.
All right, cool. Welcome, everybody, to Minutes with Mike. Today, we have our very special guest, Mr. Conor Begley, the Chief Strategy Officer at CreatorIQ. Welcome, Conor.
Thanks, Mike. Pumped for this.
Conor, it has been such a long time coming that we've hoped that we could get you on the Minutes with Mike episode, and today's finally the day. And like I said in my intro, it is a first for everything, and certainly having you along is a very special day for us. So I kind of wanted to go over some of the different things that Conor has done in the past. I've written my notes down here, Conor, so I get them correctly. Conor's been named one of the 100 most influential people in influencer marketing by Influencer Weekly. He's recognized as one of the 100 leaders of tomorrow by St. Gallen's Symposium. He's listed in the Business Insider as one of the top 23 creator experts to follow. And he's been a guest lecturer at Harvard, UCLA, Florida State, FIT, and more.
That sounds pretty cool.
Awesome.
Cooler than I actually am.
Conor, I'm going to start from the beginning a little bit. Back in the day, right? We want to get to know you a little bit. I know that you do your podcast, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I wanted to get to know you a little bit. You were born and raised in Fremont, California is where you're from. That's Southern California.
Northern California.
Northern California. Played a little high school football?
Yes.
Which led you, sorry.
That was my favorite sport by far.
Did you play others?
So I grew up playing baseball and then played basketball for a couple of years. I think I played basketball like I played football, so I fouled out of most games. I scored about 1.5 points a game, fouled out of most. But, and then played football for about 10 to 18.
Nice. Which led you to your college ranks at Cal Poly.
Yes.
So tell me about that. Tell me about Cal Poly, certainly interesting people you may have met there. Tell me about football. Tell me about all that.
Yeah. So, went to school there. My mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa all went there. Which actually made me not want to go to college there. But I think probably the most notable parts of that, outside of not studying very much and spending too much time on the beer pong table, were working or meeting both my future wife and my future business partner. So I met my wife her first week, her freshman year. And the first night I met her, I was like, I'm going to date you. We're going to date. And I had a girlfriend at the time, but, we'll pass that. It took her about 3 years to date me, but since then we've been together ever since. And then my business partner was a couple of years older than me. And we met through our fraternity, and we would stay up late at night talking about business, drinking beers. And, and then eventually that turned into, wanting to start a company together.
Your partner is, of course, John Nameth.
Correct.
Who you met at Cal Poly. You have 3 children, too, by the way. Let's not skip over that.
Yes.
Right?
Not quite as many as you. We're still working.
You're getting there. A couple of years younger, you'll get there.
Yeah.
So you met John, and I've heard you tell this story a few times, and it's fantastic. So you're definitely going to have to repeat it. But first, tell me about how Tribe came up, what you thought. Like, I don't know about your ambitions in high school, what you wanted to do, but I don't think it was to get involved in influencer marketing, right? Like, that was probably something that was, sort of reinventing itself as we went along. But like, what led you to that? And what started the conversation with John about how we can sort of get involved in that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we graduated school, or I graduated school. Then worked at a startup company. That company grew very quickly. And then after that, left and went to Australia with Marissa, who's not my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time. And so while I was out there, oddly enough, I was working at a brewery, and we realized that the bars for us were kind of influencers, right? And which again sounds obvious now, but at the time was very, very not obvious. And so they would have their Facebook fan pages with 1,000 fans. But those 1,000 fans were like the bartenders, the owners, the locals, right? Like a highly concentrated audience. And so I was talking to John, who's my buddy, and we had been kicking around different ideas in terms of starting a company. And I was like, it's really weird. I was like, bars didn't used to be publishers, right? They didn't have like fans. And I was like, and people are now becoming publishers, right? Everybody's creating content. And so this feels like a really big deal and something that hasn't happened before. And so that's kind of what led us down that path. Yeah.
And from that was born Tribe Dynamics.
Yes.
The story that ties into that. So you've been very upfront about the humble beginnings with that as well. Running a business is not easy, right? And of course, there were those tough times along the way. I've heard you in many discussions talk about, having to pay the rent and pay employees at the same time. And then there's that wonderful story about you and John, I think either building some sort of a deck at his mother's home or digging some ditches. Tell me about that again, or at least tell the audience about that.
Yeah, so we call it our ditch digging story. And so what had happened was, we raised $100,000 to get us going, or $90,000 from like friends, family, other people we had worked with. And then we got about a year in, we were making $1,000 a month. We're like running out of cash. It's like, what are we going to do? And so around that time, we were trying to get a meeting with this guy named Brian Sugar. So Brian Sugar co-founded Pop Sugar with his wife, and he was speaking at an event. And John's buddy was like cousins with him, so to speak, right? Or not so to speak, but his cousins with him. And so he gets done speaking at the event, starts walking out to the elevator, and John like ambushes him at the elevator, like, hey, wanna. And so we schedule a meeting with him. And, we get into this meeting, we're all stressed, right? Because he's a big investor and whatever. And so we do all this prep work. I got this whole deck ready. I get a couple slides into the deck, and Brian goes like, yeah, I don't give a shit about your deck. He's like, just show me your product. So we like show him the product, and he's like, guys, I'm gonna give you this magical thing. It's called revenue because it makes businesses run great. And you guys should really focus on making more of it, right? And so we're like, well, shit. Okay, so we got to go make some money. And so we went out and kind of metaphorically dug ditches. We had all these clients that were paying us $50 a month or $200 a month. We went to them and we're like, hey, like you're making $50,000 a month on your website. We think we can make you more money. If we do, pay us a cut. If we don't pay us. And we were like doubling and tripling people's revenue. It happened pretty quick. And then simultaneously, in order to make payroll, we actually went out and physically dug ditches. So John's mom lived in Marin, which is up north. So we worked Monday through Friday, 12-hour days. And Saturdays and Sundays, we went out, built a retaining wall, ripped out a staircase, did all this stuff to get enough cash to make payroll until we hit profitability, right? Because we had started digging ditches metaphorically. And I think what that taught us, it was really important, was like, and it sounds obvious now, but at the time, like, everybody was like, fuck revenue, just grow. Like, you don't need to do any of that. And so, but it really taught us the value and how to make money as a business. It was a pivotal moment for sure.
Tribe grew in leaps and bounds, right? So I'm just reading some stats that I found about Tribe as well. And you guys were named one of the fastest growing private companies in the San Francisco Bay Area by the San Francisco Business Times. Tribe Dynamics in 20, 21, and 22 at G2 rankings plus awards. Out of 180 companies, Tribe was number one. And easiest to use, number two in overall satisfaction, and number two in the highest rated overall performance in that whole influencer marketing software category. It goes without saying that, there are ups and downs in that. Certainly, turning a profit's super important when you're running a business, but were there ever times where you were like, you know what, I'm just going to go do this instead, or this is just too much, or I can't deal with this. Let me think of something different.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember we took on one of our earliest investors, one of the first ones, was a guy named Travis. And Travis was a coworker of John's. And he did a lot of angel investing, right? Like first checks into these companies. And I remember getting like a year in and we were like still going. He goes, guys, like hit a big mark. What do you mean? He's like, a lot of people get in. It's like the first 6 months is like the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
You're all excited. He's like, then the next 6 months, it's disappointment because you're not doing what you thought you would be doing and you didn't hit everything you thought you'd hit. He's like, and that's when a lot of people quit. And he's like, the fact that you guys are still excited is like a big hurdle. So I think there was a few of those kinds of moments, right? So that was one of them. I think obviously the like whole digging ditches thing, like when we hit profitability, we had $5,000 in the bank account and we owed John $5,000, right? So like we had no money essentially. And so who was I with that? So in terms of the ups and downs, there's been a few others, right? So those were a couple. The other ones that were really, but actually I shouldn't say. I think what was important, and I think it's important for anybody that wants to start a company, is like, you just have to be willing to like keep going, right? And so for me, I remember sitting in a bar with John, a lot of alcohol discussion, this talk. We were playing pool and the company was not successful yet, right? We were still kind of working through it. And I remember telling John, I was like, I'm going to drag this thing kicking and screaming into existence, whether it wants to exist or not, right? And that was just visually the way that I thought about it. And so for me, there was never a moment where we thought about shutting it down or not doing it.
This is about the time that I came into the flow here, right? Like, so I met you because somebody had told me, a client said to us, I'm going to send you the tribe list and you're going to go ahead and do this distribution and fulfillment. So we were like, okay, pretending we know what that meant. And then when we hung up the phone, we were like, what? Anybody know what tribe list means? So I started Googling and somehow I stumbled across your name, right? So I had a colleague and he said, that guy, Conor Begley, he gives like these mini little discussions where he talks about statistics and you get invited in, there's food, there's drink. We'll go have a couple beers. Maybe we can meet him.
Yeah.
And that's how we met. We came to this event. And if you've never been to one of those Conor Begley events, you really own the room. You go up there and the statistics are flashing behind you, but it's really the way that you present them. That's the whole difference there. And we were like, yeah, we gotta meet this guy, right? He knows everybody and knows what he's talking about. Let's go ahead and meet this guy. So that's how we were kind of introduced to you. And then, more and more clients were coming to us saying like one of two things. I'm going to send you a tribe list or we're going to use a list. And tribe was part of our sort of our discussions with clients.
Yeah.
Or they would come to us and say, we're going to use you guys for fulfillment and distribution. Who do you know? And as soon as we said, everybody like, shh, I'm going to drop that in a second. Do you know Conor Begley? And that's how that sort of progressed. So we've had a really nice working partnership ever since then. And I've certainly been to many a road show for now CreatorIQ, but back in the day with the tribes too. And it's really informative. So that leads...
Just to stop you there and to give Pim's credit's the wrong word, but just, thankfulness. And in those early days, you guys were probably the earliest or at least one of the earliest partners that we found. And I think that you guys and you specifically really embraced us in a way that was really impactful to the business and provided a lot of credibility and validation, right? And so yeah, it's been really cool to watch you guys grow as well, right? Because this was like influencer gifting then was not what it is today.
Right.
Totally different scale.
Right.
So you guys too, like really leaned in early. And I always remember this story, and I think it's a good way to think about PIMS. When I was meeting with you and the founder, okay, what's his name?
Mark Lippman.
Lippman. So I was with Mark, and he was talking about the early days back when you guys first started, and this like email thing came out. And you guys at the time, you were mailing like paper press releases. That was the business.
Yes.
And you're like, is this an email thing going to stick around? So it's pretty cool that you guys have been able to adapt through these like really big changes and continue to grow and do well.
Yeah, that I appreciate that too. That reinvention is really, sort of what you do on a regular basis and what we do as well, which I think is the separator between, people in our space that kind of do what we do, but not exactly what we do and how we do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which leads me to CreatorIQ, right? So in September of 2021, Tribe Dynamics was acquired by CreatorIQ. Tell me about that story.
Yeah. So, going back to these kind of ups and downs, when we first started the company, we were young. We didn't know anything about fundraising. And so we had a really hard time raising money. And then we started growing really quickly, right? So we were doubling. And then we had so much money that we were like, hey, we don't need to raise any money, right? That's not important, but we don't need it. And you know, on the down, then we lost access to all this data. This was like 2018. We went from doubling every year to had to do some layoffs, had to rescind some offers. You know, revenue flatlined for a couple of years. We learned a lot of stuff out of that. But then leading into this kind of acquisition process, we had really kind of learned and fixed a lot from that period, and we're back to growing super fast. So that time, I think we were growing 60 or 70% year over year, had raised no money basically. And so we were actually planning to go out and raise investment. And so we'd gotten a few term sheets, and we actually met with, it was about 46 investors in a 5-day time period. I went and lived at John's house and we would do pitches like every other hour, all day, every day. And then we would like after each pitch, we'd like make little changes and whatever. And then what happened was we had a meeting with Igor, who was the CEO at CreatorIQ at the time. And he's like, I'm looking at acquisitions. I'm like, oh, what space? He's like, analytics. You're probably talking about us, right? And so, and where that became relevant to all these investor discussions was when we had gotten rejected by the other 42 of them, right? They had given us reasons. And the reasons that they had given us were that we were not the biggest in our category, right? The second or third biggest. We were really big in beauty and fashion, but we weren't really big anywhere else. We didn't have good relationships with the social networks like Meta, YouTube, et cetera. And so when we looked at CreatorIQ, in addition to just being a good team and a good software, it really solved all three of those issues. They had really strong relationships with the social networks. They were big in all the categories we weren't big in. And they were kind of the biggest at the time. So together we were far and away the biggest. And so that's what led us to go down that path. It was a big decision, right? Deciding whether we wanted to go independent, stay independent, or come together. But I think a lot of what we thought would work out has worked out. You know, when you're the biggest player in the space, it's easier to raise money. You get better partners. Clients trust you more because you're just the number one guy or girl. And so, so that was the story.
I mean, it sounds like a marriage made in heaven because it's giving you the opportunity to just vault into stratosphere of opportunity, right? So, you know, Conor is the chief strategy officer at CreatorIQ, but one of the other hats he wears, or one of the many hats he wears, he does a lot of networking, right? Like I can't remember a networking event that I went to that I didn't see his head bopping around the room. And he's always great about introducing me and us to people, and not just me, but the community, as you call it, that we'll talk about in a minute, that I wanted to talk about as well. But one of the things he also does is your own podcast called Earned, right? Yeah. I think a small part of me, when they first started talking about maybe do a PIMS podcast, which started out at, you know, let the clients know what we do behind the scenes. And then season 2, we started talking to partners and clients. When somebody told me that, I kind of envisioned Earned. I'm like, well, I remember Conor saying something like it was a slow grind to get started, but now he's up to, I think we said 130 plus episodes. Yep. I have some stats on that. The podcast is a top 5% most shared podcast globally through Spotify, growing 200% year over year. And I think it began as a blog. Is that right? How you started it? Was it actually?
We started a bunch of research at first. So we created a lot of content, and then ultimately led into creating a podcast.
So it's really wonderful because he has founders and CEOs and a lot of marketing officers of different companies. But I wanted to ask you about specifically that. So now you've learned a little bit behind the scenes as we set up Conor in our Minutes with Mike podcast here. Tell me how that works on your end. Do you have to come up with a guest? Do you have to come up with the scripts? Like, how does it work on your end?
Yeah, so there's a few things I think about, right? So one, we have a team that helps us. So there's a woman named Taylor Maskett that helped me really get it off the ground and was my partner in crime there. Now we're named Amanda Kahn. We have a production team called Share Genius that helps us out with the production side of things. But I think in terms of the podcast itself, kind of my theory around that and the way that we've approached it is one, I was like, I get to talk to all these smart people all the time who are like, know things that I do not know and that other people would love to sit in on. And so for me, being able to share that with other people is really, really cool. Number one. Number two, I think when you ask to have a meeting with somebody, 50-50, right? To, hey, I want to interview you for a podcast. It allows you to meet people that maybe you couldn't have met before, right? Like it's really flattering for people. And I had done a podcast. John and I had been asked to be on the BMG podcast. And and it had gone really well, right? It had been like really fun. And it was like it was a moment in time that I could send to my kids later. It's like, hey, you want to know what work was like? Go listen to me every year. So I was like, it's so cool to be able to do that for other people. And then I think the thing that I've really focused on, and part of what's allowed us to have success in terms of the podcast itself, is I'm constantly thinking about how can we raise the bar, right? How can we keep raising the bar? So I called it my road to Rihanna, right? So it's like, okay, guys, if eventually we want to get Rihanna on the podcast, right? That's the goal. I want to get her, or, Selena or whatever. What do we need to get there? Well, it's like, well, she's going to come on. That means she needs to look at the last 5 guests and be like, oh, that kind of looks like me, right? I could do that. And so what we would do is I'd go, okay, let's think of our 20 dream guests. Like, who are the people that, like, if we got them on, we'd be fucking pumped, right? And then you reach out and maybe you only get 1 or 2 of those 20, but then, like, that steamrolls. It's not that hard to do that. And so, so I think that's something that's had a big impact on the success.
I was going to ask you about, are there any white whales out there? Somebody that you, besides Rihanna, is there anybody that you really would love to have a guest that you want to share with us that you haven't yet been able to lock down?
There's a bunch of them, right? I think that we've got a list running. It's about 50 to 75 long. There's weird ones. I don't know if this is actually, I don't know if you know the brand, Luc Belaire. You know that brand?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Luc Belaire, for those that don't know, it's a rosé champagne brand. And it is a #1 brand we track in alcohol by like a wide margin. It's also the #1 rosé in the country. And by tracking, like by influencer content. And if you look at the content, 90% of the content is one person. And that one person is Rick Ross. So Rick Ross has talked about Luc Belaire more than 2,000 times in the last year. Like, he averages like 6 to 7 posts a day, which is just insane. And so, like, that's somebody that I think would be like talk to me about it, Ross. Like, I think that could be kind of cool. So we got a long list.
That's a great one. That's awesome.
I think would be hilarious to do.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about our industry, right? We've sort of validated the point that we both kind of grew up in this industry. When we started, there wasn't an industry, and now it's our world, right? Yeah. So tell me about your thoughts on the growth of influencer marketing, whether it's, I know you talk, one of the other things that I forgot to mention was you're really good about sharing data and statistics, especially on LinkedIn. I see it almost pop up on a daily basis where you'll review, statistics year over year with clients on growth and where they're headed. Tell me a little bit about how you determine that, like, with KPIs in mind. Like, how do you personally look at the growth of the influencer marketing world?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different things, right? So on the LinkedIn front, my goal is to like surface really interesting content. And I think one of the big mistakes that people make in general around content marketing is they create stuff that's very sales driven, right? Like, it's about like trying to sell you shit all the time. And it's like, for me, if I can help people learn and get smarter and get better, and they have some anecdote they can take to their boss or tell their friend about that makes them smarter about the category, then when they are thinking about, signing up for something, they'll think of me first, right? So that's my approach to the content. I think in terms of, so it's just like, what's the most interesting shit happening right now? And fortunately, we've got all this data that helps us to kind of tell that story. I think the other area, in terms of the space itself, it's funny, like, I think there's an article every single year since probably about 2015 that's like, is the influencer bubble gonna pop, right? And like every single year there's one of those. And like, if you were to look at Google search data, which is just what are people Googling, influencer marketing's up 29x over the last 10 years, right? And there's just not many things that you can be like, I started here and it's grown 30 times bigger in 10 years. And so that trajectory has happened and continues to happen. And I'd expect it to continue to happen, right? Because as a person, if I want to learn about something, I much rather learn about it from Mike, right? From somebody I trust, than to learn about it from a magazine or an ad or something else. And so fundamentally focusing on how do we help that happen, right? How do we help brands with great products get into the hands of more people that can tell that story, I think it's just a great long-term bet. And I don't think it's going to go away. These kinds of things just don't happen.
I think you're right too, because I'm 57. If I speak to my friends that are 57 and I talk about what I do, they're like, what, huh? But if I talk to my college age son, he's like, oh, I know everybody wants to get into that, right? So it's now the next step is being determined by that group, not us, right? Like, or not me, I should say, and not, the group that has just come through that started in the world where it was press release distribution to media. Now it's a whole nother thing. It's a really good segue into my next question. The relationship between brands and creators, that also changes over time. What do you see on that front?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you were to look at the early days, right? Like, so what's happened, I think, over the last, since we've been started, the biggest change that's happened is that influencers are starting to professionalize, right? So in the early days, for most people, it was just a hobby, right? And then a few people that started to make some money in it. But I think what's now happened, like your sons realized, it's like, oh shit, this can be a job, right? Like I can turn this into something where I actually make some money. And so they've started to realize both the impact that they're having on these brands, and also started to figure out like how to actually turn that into income, right? And so I think that's really changed the nature of the relationship between a brand and an influencer, where now it's like, okay, yes, I love your brand. This is a hobby. I'm into it. But also let's figure out how we can both make money off of this, right? And so I think that's something that's changed a lot. And I think generally the other thing that's happened is in the past, people didn't want to make an influencer the face of the brand, right? That wasn't something you could do. But now you have brands like Feastables, which like I got an email from one of the largest candy bar companies in the world. Like the whole company is freaking the fuck out because Feastables is kicking their ass, right? This is one of the biggest companies in the world. And so they've started to realize like, oh shit, like I really need to invest in this in a meaningful way. It's like we had a training call with Coke, who's a new client. It's 380 people on the call. That's fucking crazy.
Wow.
That's nuts, right? And so I think that's kind of
yeah. The big question is always, certainly when it comes to PIMS too, is, people are using us for fulfillment, distribution, warehousing, but they also want to come to us because we see all the latest trends, right?
Yeah.
We know about like what's going to be hip and cool as it starts to be hip and cool. And I'm constantly on sales calls too, where people are like, yeah, we're going to do this and that, but what else can we do? Which is code word for what is everybody else doing?
Yeah.
We want to get involved in that. So what are your takes? What is Conor Begley's take on like new trends like wrapped around AI and that sort of thing? Like, where do you see that sort of stuff going?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's happening in AI that's relevant to this category is it's making it easier for people to create better content, right? So if I'm an influencer, like, now you could like load up a couple of your videos and then I could say, hey, create a video with me reading this script and it'll do that. Like, that's really cool. Or, hey, create an image of like Mike and Connor at the beach drinking margaritas and you can do it, right? And so I think that stuff just accelerates the amount of content that's getting created. I don't think it will replace them. Like, I think the virtual influencer thing is kind of overrated. I don't think that that's something that will be as big a deal. I think people still like to connect with people, but it'll make it a much easier job, or it'll be easier to do. So, I mean, I think for us, one of the things that I've enjoyed the most, and frankly, the way that we built the company was like, we saw what Nix was doing in our data. We're like, oh shit, this company's blowing up. They get acquired for $500 million. And we want to talk to them and be like, hey, whatever you're doing, other people are going to do. And I think what we tried to do organizationally was then say, okay, well, whatever Nix is doing, other people are going to want to do. So let's build around that and really try to observe the best all the time, right? Now, I think from a like fundamentals perspective, there hasn't been significant changes. It's still about building relationships. You still want to do it in-house if you can. You need to get product into people's hands. You want to spend time with them, right? Events, experiences, these kinds of things. You want to build long-term relationships, right? Build relationships over time. And in some ways, I think that the like what's changing part of things actually gets slightly overemphasized. Like if so Jeff Bezos said this one time, he got asked about the future and like, what do you think is going to change in the future? He's like, we actually don't think about that. He's like, what we focus on is what's not going to change, right? So he's like, what we know is not going to change is people are always going to want it faster. They're always going to want it cheaper. They're always going to want more options. Yep. And so it's like, okay, why are we going to do drones? It's like, well, drones help us get people shit faster and cheaper, right? And so for me, I think more about like what's not changing, which is all those core principles. And so, yeah, I don't know, kind of a roundabout way to answer.
Love it. I'm dying to ask you this next question because you put out, it wasn't part of Earned. I think it was one of those LinkedIn statistical quotes. But when you put this out, I literally cut and pasted and sent it to everybody on the management team at PIMS because you were talking about, and I want to make sure I got this right, justifying trackable sales when working with networking, right? Because I head up the networking team at PIMS and I'm friends with a bunch of guys that do similar. And the big dilemma is, how are we going to justify spending 10, 20, 50, $100,000 on this event when there's really no direct button to press for sales, right? Some sales happen overnight. Some take a year to do. You put it in such, I don't remember exactly what you said. I'm not sure if you're going to remember exactly what you said, but it was so wonderful. Tell me a little bit about that, like how you came up with that, because you live it. I know that, but like, tell me what you think about that.
Well, I think that to take it back to influencers, I think one of the biggest problems is, let's say that Susie YouTuber does a video about, urban decay. She's not going to include like a trackable link or some discount code or whatever, but clearly there's some value there, right? And I think that one of the things that's happened is that because digital advertising on like Facebook and Google, whatever, because it's so trackable, because they can track you, people want to do that with everything, right? And it's not that you shouldn't try to track things, but I think that at times we can kind of become victim of that need, right? And so it forces people, or people often will only invest in things that they can directly track. And so for me, the thing that I think a lot about is, let's start with, what do I think is going to be the most impactful? Like, how do I think I'm actually going to grow this business? Like on LinkedIn, as an example, you can't really track anything. There's been 1.3 million people that have read my content in the last year, right? Now, I don't know who any of those people are, right? And that sucks that I can't track that. But like I won't get into that. But to put it into perspective, my LinkedIn will generate more traffic than our website, plus our email marketing, plus our podcast, plus all of our research combined, right? And so saying like, okay, well, I know this is the right way to impact things. And like, I'll try to figure out how to measure it as best I can. I think it's the right way to think about marketing and sales, right? And so similar to these like networking events, it's like we hold events all the time. Like, it's hard to know exactly what happens out of those events, but like anecdotally, you just know this is a good investment, right? And so, so I think about that a lot. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes marketers make.
This is going to be a big Conor Begley tribute, right? This is how I'm going to end this, right? So, I refer to Conor as the connector of dots, right? Because I think you have done, so I've been doing this 32 years now. And the common practice when, you're networking or you're selling is if you have somebody that's interested in you or your company or your capabilities, you kind of hold that close to the chest, right? Like, I don't want to tell you exactly what I was talking about. I was talking to a guy who works at this beauty company. You came along and you built this sense of community where not only do you share your experiences and information, but you connect people together. You have nothing to gain from it other than being the person that's introduced this person to that person. That is such a refreshing approach, not only in sales and networking, but as a leader in this industry, to have somebody that cares more about the industry itself, connecting people together or building that community, which I've heard you talk about a number of times, and advancing what we're all here to do, which is certainly make money, but to grow this industry. It's refreshing. So that's not really a question. That's just a compliment to you. So kudos to you.
Yeah. I think, again, going back to a good example of that was like, we do these events, right? And we did a really big one last year in LA. And it was originally going to be about 300 people, ended up being over 700 people. And I remember when we were first doing it, like I was like, I want to bring these partners in and like have them do X, Y, Z. And they're like, well, but they're kind of competitive. Like, what if they steal a customer from us? I'm like, one, they're not, but two, like, who cares, right? Like, and I think that in a lot of ways, what it does is it puts you at the center of that ecosystem, right? If you're bringing everybody together and you're helping everybody be more successful, ultimately, the rising tide raises all ships, right? And so I appreciate that. It's definitely an approach that is one that I enjoy, but two that I think is a mistake that a lot of people make, but they don't do it.
I think you get enough credit for being, if not the guy, but certainly a leader in that landscape. So kudos to you. Which leads me, Mr. Begley, to our final thing, which is my lightning round, right? So
Okay,
I shared some questions I was going to be asking Conor. I'm sure he didn't read it. He just gave me the thumbs up. These I did not share, right? These are some questions these are this or that questions. I just want the first thing that pops into your head.
Oh, boy.
One thing I
dangerous.
haven't mentioned is Conor Begley. The one thing we don't agree on in this world is professional football. I'm a diehard New York Giants fan.
How do you feel about Daniel Jones?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in the next one.
On the record.
He might be watching. Conor is a big Detroit Lions fan. So baseball, I like the Detroit Tigers. So when I heard that, it stuck in my head, and now I send him emails goofing on him or congratulating him nowadays more and more. So this is lightning round. Little Detroit Lions, a little bit influencer marketing. So here we go.
All right, my favorite.
Feel free to, here's the Detroit Lions section. Ford Field or Pontiac Silverdome? Have you been to Pontiac Silverdome?
I missed the Pontiac Silverdome. I just went to Ford Field. I saw the Lions-Rams playoff game, which was, I think, set the record for loudest game ever, or it was close. Because, right, Stafford was there, and then left for the Rams, and then Goff got traded from the Rams. It was insane. Like, I've never been... It was the wildest sporting event I've ever been to. So, yeah, I would definitely say Ford Field. Only because that's my most recent experience.
I'm sure you'll have a little bit longer of a detailed answer on this one, but Barry Sanders or Calvin Johnson?
Wow.
Yeah, you can only pick one. And
yeah.
why?
Well, I think the main problem for me with Barry Sanders, not that it's hard to have a problem with Barry Sanders, is he retired right when I was getting into football, right? So I was just getting into it. I was young. And so he's certainly the one I've watched the most highlights from. And I would actually have to say it's probably Sanders for me, even though I didn't watch him as much. As much as I love Calvin Johnson, and I still do, they had like a weird falling out, and now they've come back.
Ended
and like,
weird, right.
Yeah, ended a little weird. So I liked that Barry, like, even though he also had like a mixed experience, like he, I think, had wanted to get traded at some point and they didn't. He never really kind of totally went rogue. So yeah.
Megatron kind of put him back on the map, though.
I know.
There's a lot of lean years.
Exactly.
I don't need to tell you about that, right?
Yeah.
Matthew Stafford or Jared Goff? Now, I heard Goff, we all saw that he just got the big contract, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to say that on the tail end of it, it looks like the Lions got the best part of that deal, right? But, like, Stafford was there for a lot of years. Who would you lean towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that trade, it was a win-win, right? Because I think, obviously, the Rams got a Super Bowl, which was pretty cool. I was a diehard Stafford guy. And so when he got traded, like, I actually went and watched the Niners Rams game, which was the game before the Super Bowl, right? It's the NFC Championship, and was like heavily rooting for Stafford. So I got to see him in that Super Bowl run, and so I feel like my time has set with Stafford. I got to see his career, I got to see him win a Super Bowl, and so now I'm on the Jared Goff thing.
Awesome.
And I actually really like, this is a crazy story. So I was, after the game, what game was it? After the Rams-Niners game. No. What game was this? No. This was Lions-Chargers in LA. And I went with my buddy Mehdi, who's the CDO at Rare Beauty. And he was also part of Nick's, who's a long part of our story. And somehow Scott, his CEO, let him expense the tickets to the game. And I expense my flights and all the food and shit, right? And so we go to this game. Hope our CFO isn't listening. So we go to this game, and they're a big client.
Yeah.
So we go to this game. Lions win. Great win. Goff's there. He has a great game. I'm on Southwest flying home, Southwest Airlines. And I'm in the way Southwest works, there's no assigned seats, right? So you kind of sit, and like you'll sit in the aisle seat, and you're like praying that nobody sits in the middle seat, right? Because like you don't want, because somebody grabs the aisle, somebody grabs the window. And so this guy walks up, and he's kind of a taller, wide shoulders, big frame dude. And he's like, "Oh, can I sit here?" I'm like, "Fuck." And so then he sits down next to me, and he's chewing gum, the loudest I've ever heard anybody chew gum in their life. And he's watching, the post-game press conference on his phone. And I was like, "Oh shit, I kind of want to watch that too." So I turned it on, and I'm listening. because we just went to the game. And then we'd start taking off, and I bought the Wi-Fi, and he didn't. And so he looks over at my phone, he's like, and Jared Goff was on. And I was like, oh, hey. He's like, oh, hey, what's he saying? And I was like, oh, blah, 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 blah. He's like, oh, yeah, he's my son. I'm like, what the fuck? Yeah. And so his dad was a professional Major League Baseball player. And he's like, yeah, I never fly Southwest. I didn't know I had to check in early. So that's how, so he doesn't usually fly Southwest. And so we ended up chatting the whole way home on the plane. He bought me a beer. We're hanging out. I get all this insider information on the team.
That is awesome.
And like, all this shit.
Oh my God, what a great story.
Yeah. So that's definitely made me even more connected to golf.
That's awesome.
That. Yeah.
What do you think about
this?
His
Dad
year?
was a great guy.
This year they're going to be...
I mean, they're Super Bowl contenders.
Would you rather make and win one playoff game, yes or no, or have a top first-round pick? On a team that was built with first-round picks.
Yeah. I mean, I think today, right, I want them to go to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I want.
Yeah.
Like, we've gotten all the draft picks.
Yeah.
Like, let's get
It's
some
time.
playoffs. Yeah. And, I mean, they were leading by 17 points to go to the fucking Super Bowl last year. I was with all my friends and my family, and I was trying not to be smug because they're all Niners fans, and the Lions are kicking the shit out of them. And I'm like, we're going to the fucking Super Bowl. In my head, I'm like, am I going to have to drop $20,000 on these fucking Super Bowl tickets? I mean, it kind of saved me $20,000, you know? But I was like, and then they come out the second half, and I've never seen a bigger comedy of errors, right? Just fucking wild.
It was bad.
But yeah, I thought we were going to the Super Bowl, for sure. And we were going to play the Chiefs, who we beat first game of the season. So I was like, we got a shot.
I did think of you, and I had to wait like a couple days before I sent you that email. he needs a decompression time.
Oh, I was so fucking
All right, let's go to the influencer marketing part of this. So,
Okay.
Micro-influencer or macro-influencer?
Micro-influencer that's growing. So there's a lot of shitty micro-influencers, but you got to find the ones that are growing. Like if they're growing already, they'll more than likely keep growing. There's a bunch of other stats on it, but that's the most important one. And the whole theory is, you want to build a relationship with Kim Kardashian when she was Paris Hilton's assistant, when she was a little micro-influencer, and then you grow with them. So that would be my guess.
Instagram stories or Instagram posts?
It's tough. I would say, as a brand, Instagram stories, but I'd actually say Instagram Reels.
I was just going to say, I don't know, I'm going to admit this. What's the difference between a story and a reel?
Yeah, so a reel is story goes away. It's like post, it's like three, short, and it disappears. Reel stays forever, and it's a video. So it's like a TikTok. It's basically.
And the reels are those 30-second little blurbs.
Yeah. It's basically just a TikTok. It's a good way to think about it.
Long-term partnership or one-time collaboration?
Long term, for sure.
User-generated content or professionally shot content?
User.
Engagement rate or follower count?
Engagement rate.
Niche influencer or mainstream influencer?
Niche.
Influencer blogs or influencer podcasts?
Oof. Podcasts. Because blogs are becoming less relevant.
I might be an influencer at this point.
Yeah,
After this episode, for sure. And my last one is paid partnership or organic shout-out?
Organic shout-out, for sure.
Conor Begley, thank you so much for joining us here at Minutes with Mike. Everybody, thank you again for watching. This is Mike Ryan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.